Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream of Israelite podcast. And my guest today is Walter Mattfeld. Walter has a Master of Arts in Education with an emphasis in social studies, history, 1968 California Polytechnic State College, San Luis Obispo, California. And he is a retired educator, having taught history, geography, and art in the United States Department of Defense Overseas School District from 1970 to 2002, having served in Scotland, U.S. Navy, the Netherlands, NATO, England, U.S. Air Force, South Korea, and West Germany, U.S. Army. His main interest is in the Bible's pre-biblical origins, traced to Mesopotamia and Canaanite mythical motifs and scenarios. He also has an interest in identifying the route of the Exodus, its stations, and the sites involved in Israel's conquest of Moab under Moses and Canaan under Joshua. So welcome to History Valley Podcast, Walter Mattfeld.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So can you, I'd like to start off with this question. Can you tell us a bit about what got you interested in investigating the historicity of the Exodus and what led you down the path of concluding that the Hyksos are the Jews in the Exodus story?
Well, It's a rather sad, gruesome story, to tell you the truth. This all began about the year 1970. At that time, I had just joined a fundamentalist Christian church, and after a year with them, they were presenting to me a Bible and a God who was a horrible monster. This wounded my soul as a Christian, devout Christian at that time. And I thought to myself, if these people are right, what a horrible God this is. I need to know, is the Bible really the Word of God? But how will I find out? Eventually, I came to realize it would be the field of archaeology, which would reveal the Bible could not be the Word of God. So that was a bit of a long time, though. We're talking 1970 to about 1990. It was in 1990 that I became exposed on the internet to research by professional scholars in archaeology of the Middle East. And from them, I learned that the Bible's story of the Exodus could not be supported by the archaeological evidence. So, accepting the archaeologists' explanations, I then posed different questions to myself. I thought, well, I want to find out where some of these motifs in the Bible are coming from. In other words, I wanted to investigate the pre-biblical origins of the Bible. What were the Hebrews getting their ideas from and recasting these ideas into the biblical stories of Genesis and Exodus and the conquest? I eventually concluded, based on archaeological evidence, that the Exodus as portrayed in the Bible couldn't have happened. The archaeology didn't support it. But I also discovered another question. I said, well, if the archaeologists are right and there's no archaeological evidence, where then is this idea in the Bible coming from of the worship of a golden calf and dance naked in its honor? And where's the notion coming of Moses walking down a mountain with the 10 Commandments, throwing them down and breaking them upon hearing the golden calf? I thought to myself, oh, the archaeologists saying, oh, this is just nonsense. But I didn't believe that. I knew there had to be something behind that. So I launched new investigations into this, and I finally identified what the archaeologists had overlooked. I discovered the archaeologists were half right and half wrong. They were half right that there was no pottery evidence in the Sinai or Negev for 600,000 Israelite soldiers and their families. Not for 1446 BC Exodus or a 1260 BC Exodus, two popular dates for Exodus these days. But I refused to believe that there was nothing in the Sinai, and I discovered what had happened. It was my aha moment was a Christian pilgrimess whose name was Egeria. She lived about the 4th century AD, and she kept a notebook of her travels in Egypt and the Sinai. In that notebook, she noted that her Christian guides told her that, yeah, that's the book, you got it. Her Christian guides told her that they were coming down a valley. They had just left a place called Paran, today called Tel Feiran in Arabic. And they were coming down this valley toward the holy mountain. And her Christian guides pointed out to her stone circles on both sides of the valley, especially toward its entrance. And her guide said, "These, madam, are the remains of huts built by Moses, Israelites, while they were here for a year." And they noted smaller stone circles, which were pens for animals. Hence the notion that Israel left Egypt with animals. Well, that was my aha moment, because I learned later Israeli archaeologists had found those stone circles in a valley called the Nagib Hawa, meaning the ascent of the wind. What they said was the pottery in these stone circles was not 1446 BC, not 1260 BC, it was 2300 BC, early Bronze Age too. So the Christian guides were wrong. But that was the big break for me, because I then said to myself, wait a minute, if these guides can misdate these stone circles as Moses camps, what's to stop the Iron Age 2 people in ancient Israel also making the same mistake and identifying the stone circles as Moses camps? Because until the English explorer Sir Flinders Petrie created pottery typologies about 1890 AD, nobody knew the real age of any site in Egypt, the Sinai, Canaan, Moab, nobody. And so it dawned on me that the Bible did give a date for the Exodus. It was 1446 BC, 1 Kings 6:1. So I concluded the ancient Israelites of Iron Age 2 must have dated everything in the Exodus as 1446 BC. Everything they saw, all the archaeological debris everywhere, in Sinai, in Egypt, in the Negev, in the Araba, but they were wrong. It wasn't all 1446 BC or 1260. Some of the sites were as early, based on my research, as 5000 BC. Other sites were 2300 BC. Some sites were 1150 BC. So that made sense to me of why the archaeology wasn't matching up to the Bible. The Bible people simply did not have the ability to correctly date any archaeological object in the Sinai. They dated everything 1446 BC. And so that meant that I could do a better job on identifying sites in the Sinai and the Negev mentioned in the Bible Exodus story. What I concluded was that the archaeologists were, like I said, half right that they couldn't find anything of 1446 or 1260 of any large pottery trail of broken pottery. They were right on that. But the big falling out between me and the archaeologists is they failed to realize that the Iron Age 2 people simply had no access to Petrie's pottery topologies to know how to properly date a site. So, innocently, they dated everything 1446 BC. And so the sites were real. The archaeologists had dismissed the sites that were real because they didn't have the pottery debris of 1446 or 1260. They failed to realize these sites were anywhere from 5000 BC to 586 BC. That made a great deal of difference. An example of this would be, I remember I have a private collection on Bible research. Bible atlases prior to about 1960 showed a site in the Sinai called Kibroth Hattaavah, and they identified it in Arabic as Erwis Ibereg. And that was in a lot of atlases up until the 1950s. What happened was archaeologists went to the site, dug it up, and they discovered there was no pottery debris for 1446 BC or 1260 BC. But there was pottery debris. The pottery debris was 2300 BC and the early Bronze Age 2 period. And so because of that discovery, later Bible atlases dropped the place of Kibroth Hattaavah from their Bible maps and ignored it. But my contention is they ignored perilously, because at the time it was suggested by scholars, they had said that Kibroth mentions another place called Tabors, meaning place of the burning. And a scholar by the name of Palmer, a British archaeologist, had looked at Erwis Ibereg and had noted ashes all over the place, campfire ashes, even dug into them with a shovel, quite extensive. And then he noted at the perimeter of the camp were large groupings of stones, as if they were stones for graves. And so on that basis, he suggested this was Kibroth Hattaavah and Tabora, that they weren't two separate sites, there was one site. The campfires were Tabora and the stones were the graves. And so I believe he was right. He had correctly found Kibroth Hattaavah at Erwis Ibereg. So that's the big difference in identifying sites. So then I used that same logic to look for Mount Sinai. Where is it? There's about 12 different suggestions on Mount Sinai, and none of them passed the muster with the archaeologists. They said, none of these sites have got the pottery debris of 1446 or 1260 BC. So until that pottery debris shows up, we are withholding any notion that Mount Sinai has been found. Well, I discovered from the statements made by Egeria that there was pottery debris in the stone circles going up to the Eraha plain under Jebel Musa. And so I realized, aha, the Israelites in Iron Age times took those stone circles and called them Moses camps. And so the Christian tradition that this was Mount Sinai was verified by those stone circles being understood to be Israelite camps. Now, that's part of the story. On the plain of Eraha, under the slopes of Ras Safsafa, which is the lowest peak of Jebel Musa, there's a wide plain called Eraha. And archaeologists found nothing of 1446 or 1260 there. But about 1990, Egyptians using bulldozers unearthed a Neolithic site in the plain atop a banana rise, and they dated it to Neolithic times. That's 5,000 BC. It's my opinion that the Iron Age Israelites came across that Neolithic site under Ras Safsafa and thought it was Israel's camp, where Israel beheld God descending on Ras Safsafa. I say Ras Safsafa, not Jebel Musa, because from the Eraha plain, Jebel Musa cannot be seen. The only peak that can be seen from the Eraha plain is Ras Safsafa. So for me, Ras Safsafa is the Mount Sinai. However, there's nothing there to suggest a golden calf and the smashing of 10 commandments. So I did some more looking, and I thought to myself, well, you know, the archaeologists are saying there's nothing around because they've looked, but they were looking for 1446 or 1260 pottery. I discovered that there was not one Mount Sinai, there were two Mount Sinais. The first one from the Bible is Ras Safa. The second one, not mentioned in the Bible, is Jebel Serabit el Hadim, about 65 miles north of Ras Safa. Here at Jebel Serabit el Hadim, archaeologists discovered a temple dedicated to the cow goddess Hathor. Hathor is two words combined together, meaning house of Horus, Horus the hawk god. And in Egyptian myth, Hathor takes on the ability of being a cow with an udder to provide milk to Horus and to Pharaoh. She also is the sky during the day and night. At night, her body is covered in stars. She admits everybody into the underworld. Hathor, I discovered myths, had a son called Pharaoh. Pharaoh was her son. And in the Egyptian pyramid texts of the 6th dynasty, Pharaoh Pepe says, "O Horus, do not leave me boatless, for I am a golden calf of heaven." There it was, what I had been searching for. an admission in an Egyptian text identifying who or what was the golden calf. It was these pyramid texts from the 6th dynasty Egypt. And so I found a picture from a tomb showing a small boat called a bark, B-A-R-K, and at its tiller stands an Egyptian steering it. In front of the Egyptian sits with a human body Horus with his hawk's head. In front of Horus stands on 4 legs a male calf. Over the male calf's body hovers a polar star associated with the dead pharaoh. So here it was in picture form. According to the Egyptians, every morning when the sun came up at sunrise, they envisioned that sun as being a dead pharaoh and a golden calf. And this golden calf rode a boat on an invisible Nile River across the sky, and at sunset, the calf became a golden bull who impregnated Hathor, his sky mother, with sperm so that he could be reborn as the golden calf again at sunrise the next day. I also discovered that in the worship of Hathor, her devotees did it 25 times a year, and they worshiped her by loud, boisterous song and dance and getting skunkin' drunk. They also engaged while drunk in lewd sex with each other. And all this was to honor and emulate Hathor, who in myths got drunk, and by getting drunk, she ceased in her attempt to annihilate all of mankind who had spoken rudely of the sun god Re. So, to me, that explained why Moses has Israel drink the golden calf in pottered form in water. It's a recasting of Hathor's devotees drinking wine from grapes and beer in her honor to get drunk, have sex, and remember the day she ceased the slaughter of mankind. So I thought to myself, well, that's nice. Now, the big one, where is the 10 Commandments? I said to myself, you know what? If you can find a mountain in the Sinai that honors an Egyptian bovine god, you're on your way to finding the 10 Commandments. So we had Hathor's shrine at Serabit El Hadim. We had the story of the golden calf, and also the getting drunk and naked and sex and all that. So I thought to myself, you know what? The Bible gives us some clues where the 10 Commandments are at. We're told that Moses goes up to the mountain. There, he chisels out of the living rock 2 plates of stone. God then engraves the stones with the 10 Commandments. Moses then goes down the mountain, and at the foot of the mountain, he hears Israel at song and dance of the golden calf, and in anger, he throws the commandments down, smashing them at the foot of the mountain. So I said to myself, I'm going to look at the mountains around the Hathor shrine. Oh my God. At the bottom of the mountains, near cave entrances to the mines, archaeologists found shattered stone tablets carved from the living rock of the mountain, written in a language today called Proto-Sinaitic. It is the ancestor of Hebrew. And they were able to translate some of the tablets. And the tablets were made by Asiatic miners from Canaan. And they were asking the gods for protection and help in finding turquoise and bronze or copper to ship back to Egypt. Inside of one of these mining caves, archaeologists found inscribed in the Proto-Sinaitic script the loan word El. In the Bible, God at Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments is called El. So there I had found all the connections. However, I realized from what the archaeologist said about these tablets, the tablets were not of 1446 nor 1260 BC. They were much earlier. They were dated to about 1800 BC or 1550 BC. So it dawned on me that probably what happened was this. Iron Age 2 Israelites wandered down into the Sinai to Paran, modern Tel Feiran. There, they left their pottery from Judea. This pottery is dated the 9th and 8th centuries BC. It's my understanding that these Judeans visited Araha Plain and Rasafsafa and made them Mount Sinai. But they also must have visited Serabit el-Hadim and saw the broken tablets and statuettes, stelas dedicated to a cow goddess called Hathor. They could not read the Proto-Sinaitic scripts, but they probably could have realized that the scripts were an ancient ancestor of their own Iron Age 2 Hebrew script. And so that ties in the background for me in my research of the pre-biblical origins of what's behind the Ten Commandments. In other words, what I'm saying is the archaeologists found the Ten Commandments and they sit in museums around the world for scholars to study the Proto-Sinaitic scripts. But these museum curators are oblivious to the idea that these tablets are what are behind Moses' shattered 10 commandments. So they don't see that at all. This is uniquely my idea, which I've been promoting for the past 20 years at my website. I have a blog called www.bibleorigins.net that I've been publishing my research at. And I have several articles on the Ten Commandments showing pictures of them in their shattered state and pictures of the golden calf and other pictures of other places identified in the Exodus account. So that was my big discovery, for me, finding the Ten Commandments, finding the golden calf, finding why the Christian guides in the 4th century AD thought Jebel Musa was Rasafsa was the Israelite camp, the stone circles. By the way, these stone circles with their smaller circles near them. The larger circles represent the foundations of huts. The smaller, nearer stones are corrals for goats and sheep. The Iron Age peoples, in identifying these as the campsites of Israel in their 40 years wanderings, looked at those corrals and concluded Israel must have left Egypt with cattle and sheep and goats, hence these corrals next to these huts. And these corrals and huts are in the thousands all over Sinai and the Negev, which would bring to mind the story of Israel wandering the Sinai and Negev for 40 years. How else to account for these stone circle huts and pens scattered in the thousands all over the Sinai? So we need now to really go to what this main story is about, and that's the Hyksos. The Hyksos is interesting. I'm not the first person to identify the Hyksos expulsion as being recast in the Bible as Israel's Exodus. That goes to a Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus, who wrote a history of the Jews around 70 AD. He had read a history of Egypt written in Greek by an Egyptian priest called Manetho. Manetho had talked about the expulsion of the Hyksos and had said that the city was too strong to capture, so a bargain was set. The Hyksos would be allowed to leave with their families and with their arms and weapons to return to Canaan if they would evacuate the city. So, according to Manetho, the Hyksos took up on the proposition. Now, according to Egyptian records of this time found in Thebes, the Pharaoh has said that he was upset that Egypt was under the rule of the Hyksos in the north and Cushites in the south. In other words, his Theban kingdom had enemies on either side occupying Egypt. This Pharaoh said, I want all of Egypt to be free of foreign rule. I will engage in war against the Hyksos and the Cushites and liberate all of Egypt. And that's what he began to do. What happened was that a message was sent by the Hyksos chieftain at Avaris, and he said to the chieftain at Cush, come, this Theban Pharaoh is attacking me. I'll hold him down, and you bring your forces up from Cush and attack him in the rear. And between the two of us, we will destroy this Egyptian Pharaoh, and then you and I will divide Egypt up between the two of us. There will be no native Egyptian Pharaoh anymore. It'll be Hyksos and Cushite. Well, that letter got intercepted by the Theban Pharaoh's soldiers at an oasis. So that letter proved that the Hyksos were intent on making all of Egypt theirs. There would be no native rulers for Egypt. Now, of course, the Bible presents a different story. The Bible says that Pharaoh came to forget a man called Joseph. and that this Pharaoh feared that the Israelites would rise up and rebel and join Egypt's enemies and destroy Egypt. Well, that to me matches perfectly with what the Theban Pharaoh said, that the Hyksos were enemies of Egypt. They wanted to destroy it, and that's what the Bible says, that the Egyptian Pharaoh is afraid of Israel, afraid that Israel will join Egypt's enemies and destroy Egypt. That's a connection right there between archaeology and the Bible for me. Another connection between the Bible and archaeology is that the archaeological statements that the Pharaoh allows the Hyksos to leave Egypt, and after they've left Egypt, he changes his mind and pursues after them to engage them in battle. This is exactly what Pharaoh Ahmose I did. He let the Hyksos leave Egypt, and then once they were in the Sinai, he changed his mind, gathered his chariot forces, and chased after them. In the Bible, Pharaoh catches up with Israel, and a battle ensues. In the Egyptian records, Ahmose catches up with the Hyksos at a place called Shar-u-hen near Gaza and engages them in battle. In the Bible, Pharaoh loses at the Red Sea. In the Egyptian records, Egypt wins the battle at a place called Shar-u-hen. In the Bible, after the Red Sea, Israel is in a place called the Wilderness of Shur. I think the Wilderness of Shur is just a different rendering of Egyptian Shar-u-hen. So those are some connections. We have another connection. That is Jericho. Now, in the Bible, we're told Joshua destroys Jericho. The walls fall. Joshua orders the burning of the city and everything in it. Well, that would be nice if we could find something like that. Well, the archaeologists did. In the 1950s, a British archaeologist called Kathleen Kenyon excavated Jericho. She discovered the walls had fallen due to an earthquake. And at the time of the earthquake, the city was being besieged, and the enemies went up the walls and set the whole city on fire. Kenyon said ashes were everywhere in that city. The date for this, according to Kenyon, was 1550 BC. Who set the fire? According to Kenyon, it was Pharaoh Ahmose I in pursuit of the Hyksos that he had expelled from Egypt. What he wanted to do was he would conquer all of the Hyksos kingdom of Canaan to prevent any future invasions from Hyksos lands into Egypt. So this was his way of assuring his country that it would not face ever again another Hyksos invasion, because the Hyksos would be slaves under their Egyptian masters all the way to the Euphrates River. This Egyptian empire lasted 400 years, roughly 1540 to 1140 BC, and Ramesses VI. And so that for me is what is in the Bible as a 400-year slavery of Hebrews in Egypt. They were in in Egypt, an Egyptian empire, was Canaan to the Euphrates. That was Egypt. And Egyptian records show Egyptian military forces going into Canaan repeatedly over the centuries, capturing Canaanite peoples and hauling them back to Egypt as slaves to build the monuments of Egypt, including the monuments of Pharaoh Ramesses II. So there it was, the archaeological evidence for me. But of course, there's another side story that is even more interesting. Archaeologists had thought that the Battle of Ai had been done by Joshua, and that this was 1406 or 1260. When they excavated Ai, which is modern Et-Tel, they discovered the city didn't exist at those times. It had ceased as a city by about 2300 BC, early Bronze Age times. So, this meant for me that what we're looking at is proof that the Iron Age peoples had no way of knowing the real age of any site in the Exodus narratives. They were all misdated as 1446 to 1406 BC, all of them. And of course, this was not acceptable to Bible believers. Bible believers will not accept this. And so that's interesting. In Moab, however, we have Joshua. And of course, Joshua is famous for burning Jericho. Jericho's burning, according to Kenyon, was 1550 BC. End of early Bronze Age 2, beginning of the late Bronze Age 1. But in Moab, two sites were excavated called Heshbon and another site called Eleah. It's just 3 miles to the northwest of Heshbon. The archaeologists discovered that neither site was earlier than Iron Age 1. Iron Age 1 is 1200 BC to 1100 BC. Now, if Jericho's burnt wall is 1550 and Ai's demise was 2300 BC, and Heshbon and Eleah's beginnings are 1200 BC, you got hundreds of years between each one of these sites that will not coordinate with the Bible story of all these sites falling within a few years, which means the Exodus as portrayed in the Bible is fiction. But I was interested in what is behind this fiction. I was convinced that within this fiction, there must be archaeological data to reveal when these sites really existed and come up with an explanation for why they fail to support the Bible Exodus of 1446 or 1260 BC. So that's where I finally wound up by the 1990s from my research into the Bible. So I am a member of the group called Academia, joined them about 3 or 4 years ago. And people who have an interest in this subject can Google my name as Academia Profile Walter R. Mattfeld, and you'll be taken to a listing of some 49 scholarly papers I've written regarding the Bible, sites of the Exodus, regarding the Ten Commandments being found, regarding the finding of the golden calf, regarding the finding of the sacred mountain, sacred to an Egyptian bovine god, Hathor. I wasn't the first to do all this, however. Don't make that claim. In 1979, there was a Jewish scholar. His name was Zivi Ilan from Tel Aviv. He wrote a paper in Hebrew suggesting, based on his findings, that Mount Sinai was Serabit el Hadim, and that behind the golden calf was the Egyptian cow goddess Hathor. He also wrote that in a mining cave was found inscribed on the cave wall the word in Proto-Semitic El of the Bible. However, his colleagues were not impressed by his paper, and his suggestions were not accepted really. They just went into ignorant bliss, and the only thing that's around is a film made in 1979 called In Search of the Ten Commandments, narrated by a Star Trek star by the name of Leonard Nimoy. And he did a fine job narrating it. I believe Leonard is Jewish, and the sponsors of the film In Search of the Ten Commandments were also Jewish. So they must have thought there was something there in that 1979 paper, and there was. But academia ignored it. So that was a surprise for me. I'm going to shut up now and let you ask any questions that you may have.
There's some confusion in the chat. Some people thought that you said that the Exodus happened in 5000 BCE, and I know that you don't think that. Can you straighten that out? When do you place the Exodus?
The Exodus foundational event is going to surprise you. As portrayed in the Bible from Heshbon and Elaleah, those two sites are no earlier than 1200 BC, not any earlier. The crushed, fallen walls of Jericho and its severe burning is 1550 BC. You're talking of a time period between Jericho and Heshbon of roughly 300 years. So the Exodus in the Bible is a conflation of two events separated in time by 300 years. The real Exodus is the Hyksos expulsion of 1530 or 1550 BC. I've seen both dates for the expulsion. Now, regarding the Hyksos, according to the Bible, when Jacob comes down into Egypt with his family, he's spoken of as being a wandering Aramaean who became a great people in Egypt. Well, Aramaean can also be translated in some Bibles as Syrian. Jacob was a Syrian. Here's a book here by Manfred Bitek, dated 1996, Avaris. From this book, I learned that the Hyksos temples and houses, domestic houses, were made after similar exemplars in northern Syria. Where does Abraham come from? northern Syria, a place called Haran. So I see here that the Bible is being supported. Northern Syrians are coming down, being called Hyksos by the Egyptians, which means rulers of foreign countries, and they are in Egypt. And these Syrians, which are also called by the Egyptians Amu or Amorites, are the Egyptians, are these Israelites. As far as anything of the Hyksos world in the Sinai, at Jebel Serabit el Hadamim, archaeologists discovered a cartouche of Pharaoh Ahmose I. He's the guy that expelled the Hyksos in 1550 BC. His cartouche is on a column in the Hathor temple at Serabit el Hadamim. They also discovered in the rubble the remains of Hyksos scarabs bearing Hyksos designs, the scarab being in the shape of a beetle. They also discovered in the rubble pottery with an unusual design on it called Tel El Yehuda ware, associated with the Hyksos. So we have in the southern Sinai objects associated in the biblical text, in the Egyptian text, with the Hyksos wars. Tel El Yehuda ware, Hyksos scarabs, and the name of Pharaoh Ahmose I. They're there in the southern Sinai, not in the large numbers of 600,000 people. The largest number of people that I'm aware of that archaeologists have found in inscriptions at Serabit Hadamim is that one mining operation was enumerated as having 730 mine workers. Now, something else people may not be aware of. At Serabit el Hadamim, inscriptions were found by archaeologists mentioning a man called Moses. In Hebrew, his name is Moshe. In English, Moses. They found these inscriptions. Turned out to say that this Moses was the leader of a group of miners from Asia, from a place called Gath. And they mentioned his family names also. So it was a dedicated memorial to him. So then I discovered in the Egyptian language that leaders of mining expeditions from Egypt were called Moses as their name. And the way it was used in their name was Mary Mash. Mary Mash. Mash meaning soldiers or an expedition or an army. And how is Moses presented in the Bible? He's presented as the leader of soldiers, 600,000 Jewish soldiers with weapons. And here we have Egyptians calling leaders of their mining expeditions Mary Mash, meaning leader of an army or leader of an expedition or leader of soldiers. So that connects up with Moses in the Bible, why he's presented as being a soldier. It's an Egyptian mining title. And anybody who is in charge of an Egyptian expedition, the Serabit Hadamim, would have that tagged onto his name, Mary Mash, leader of the expedition. I found that in a Dictionary of Ancient Egypt written in 2000 by Donald Redford, who's an Egyptologist. He was the chief editor of it. And so that's interesting. We've got a Moses at Serabit El Hadim in charge of an expedition, which can also be called an army. This Mary Mosh guy, apparently in early times, First Dynasty, was a soldier accompanying an Egyptian expedition into the Sinai to fight off Sinai nomads. Over time, as the Egyptians got better and better control of the Sinai, they kept the title of Mary Mosh and gave it to leaders of expeditions who were not necessarily soldiers, but the name stuck over the centuries. So that would explain why Moses is in the southern Sinai as an Egyptian name, and why he was associated with soldiers to protect the mines from nomadic incursions. All this information found by myself and posted at my website, www.origins. I'd like to point out a couple of books that have been very helpful in my research. This one is called East of the Jordan, Territories and Sites of the Hebrew Scriptures, written in 2000 by MacDonald of the American Schools of Oriental Research, Boston. What makes this book so important for research on the Bible and the Exodus is this gentleman is an expert on archaeology in Moab, Edom, Ammon, those areas during the Exodus time. And so he lists all the sites, what archaeologists found, and whether the site is in agreement with the Bible or in disagreement. He finds or concludes from his research in this book that the Exodus world is not that of the Hyksos, 1530 BC. It is not 1406 BC of 1 Kings 6:1, nor is it the world of 1260 BC and Ramesses. The world of the Exodus, according to this guy, is Iron Age 2, very late, 7th and 6th centuries BC. Everybody needs to read this book. It was published in 2000. Fantastic. At one time, the book was on the internet for free downloading. I don't know if it is still now. Another book that's very important for people doing research is this one by the Egyptologist Donald D. Redford, Egypt, Canaan, in Ancient Times, 1992. He's the one who's willing to stick his neck out on the chopping block and say definitely that the Hyksos expulsion was recast as, oh yeah, you got it, as the Exodus under Moses.
Yeah, as you know, I've interviewed him on that, discussing that book too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you don't have that book, East of the Jordan, in your collection, you're doing yourself a big disfavor by not getting it. It'll blow your mind away.
I'll have to get it. Yeah. I'll leave the links to all these books in the description below, everybody. And also make sure to use the History Valley Amazon affiliate links. It helps support me. And it'll be in the description box below.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say some other things along the way. Other archaeologists have come to the opinion in other books that I've read that the world portrayed in the Bible of the Exodus in Egypt and in other places is a world of the 7th and 6th centuries BC, not a world of the Hyksos, not a world of the 1446 or 1260. It's 7th and 6th century BC world. And that world, of course, has got places that archaeologists have verified had gone out of existence by 2300 BC. And for me, the plain of Er Raha under Ras Safsafa, that site had gone out of existence in the Neolithic period of 5000 BC. So the dates, to be able to date the Bible by archaeological findings is a very tricky slope because they didn't know the real age of any site. And so these sites from 5000 BC to 562 are all jumbled into the Exodus narratives. And that's why the archaeologists and Bible scholars are going nutso, tearing their head out of their head. They can't make the archaeological findings fit the Bible story. And today they're all focused on 1446 or 1260, and there ain't nothing there that's going to work for them. The answer is what I have found, that it is a jumble of sites because nobody knew the age of any ancient site in the Iron Age 2 times. And so the earliest period that I would give to the creation of the Exodus story is going to probably be the 7th or 6th centuries BC. Now, along that route, I came across something else of interest. In the Bible, we're told that the high priest of the temple, Hilkiah, finds the Torah while cleaning out the temple, and he presents it to King Josiah. And Josiah tears his hair out and says, "Oh my God, we're doing everything wrong. We need to reform the nation and do what God says in this Torah," which they call the law. Well, that event is taking place in the 7th century BC, the 600s BC. Now, in the book of Genesis, mention is made of a site in Edom called Bozrah. When Bozrah was excavated, they were shocked. The site's pottery was no older than the 8th century BC. Wait a minute. Bozrah's pottery is 8th century BC, and Hilkiah is finding the Torah in the 7th century BC. Within a space of 100 years of the founding of Bozrah, the Torah is found. How about that? Maybe Moses didn't write the Torah. Maybe Hilkiah, the high priest, wrote the Bible and passed it off on Josiah as being the work of Moses. Something to think about.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That occurred to me too. Because I know that some scholars they will say that Hilkiah's Torah was simply the book of Deuteronomy, but it sounded to me like it was referring to maybe the entire thing because the King Josiah didn't seem to know about the commandments. He was kind of surprised.
Yeah.
Where are these commandments? What?
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Also, something else that I discovered: Genesis to 2 Kings is called the primary history by some scholars. I note that some authors used a system called a ring composition to to form their histories about. In a ring composition, the beginning foreshadows the end, and the end alludes back to the beginning. And I noticed that the primary history seemed to be a ring composition. In other words, Adam and Eve are removed from their land by God for disobeying, foreshadowing God's removing from their land Israel and Judah for disobedience. So that suggests to me an overall situation there by maybe one person putting this all together or editing it all together, whichever way you like. And the latest date that we can find is 2 Kings 25:27, where it says, the king of Babylon was evil Merodach. He releases from prison the Jewish king, who allows him to eat at his table. Well, according to the Assyrian records, Amel Marduk was killed, assassinated, in a palace putsch by 560 BC. Perhaps the Bible from Genesis to 2 Kings was composed before the assassination of evil Marduk in 560 BC, because the author knows nothing about other Babylonian kings that came to the throne. He knows nothing about the three kings of Babylon that were enthroned before Babylon fell to Cyrus the Great in 539 BC. So, something to think about.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me today, Walter Mattfeld.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I'll leave the links to your website, and also the books that we were discussing earlier will be in the description box below and in the pinned comments. So everybody check for that. And I'll be seeing everybody later. Thanks, Walter.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.